I think if you're going around trying to prevent harm from being caused at the cost of exploration and freedom to make mistakes, you're kind of taking away a person's agency in that situation, you know? When I found myself tumbling out of New Age spirituality and sort of beginning to process the negative impact that it and the cult that I was involved in had had on my life, I found myself trading up an all or nothing investment in one belief system for an all or nothing investment in another belief system. I went from being a New Ager to a new atheist. It's a phase that, in homage to Philosophy Tube, I've sort of termed my atheist edgelord phase, my Dawkins phase. Most atheists go through it, and thankfully most of them come out the other end too. Part and parcel with what was ultimately a militant rational approach to everything that I was experiencing was this idea that rationality was the very best tool to deal with absolutely everything that I was experiencing. Absolutely any mystery could be solved with rationality was the way I was approaching it. And what came along with that was this implicit assumption that the version of rationality, the specific iteration of rationality that not only I was applying, but that we as a people at the moment at this point in our history think of when we think of rationality, there was this implicit assumption that that version of rationality was the best tool for the task. So this thought keeps coming back to me about rationality, right? That maybe at some point in the future, someone could come up with a better way to use rationality than any of us on this planet at the moment can think of because of the limits of the knowledge that we have. So if nothing else, I think a little bit of humility goes a long way there. I mean, we're talking about a way of thinking, not the literal Bible, for crying out loud. It's not a holy text, it's a tool. It's one way of making sense of things. One thing that I did come to with all of this, and it's something that I've talked about on the channel before, was that just because you can't provide evidence for something, just because the evidence provided for something doesn't meet the standard at which you might be happy to accept that thing as true, doesn't mean that that thing isn't valuable in some way. It doesn't mean that there isn't some benefit or value of believing in that thing or treating that thing as if it is true in some sense. Rationality is a really useful tool, and it has and continues to make so many things possible. And honestly, it's a must if you want to survive in the world without completely losing the plot. But rationality is not without its limitations, and for me, the prevailing sort of rational skeptic mode that I was sort of invested in at one point fails to recognize the limitations of rationality. And let me just interrupt myself just 1 second to say that if you want to hear more about like my personal journey figuring these things out and exploring these kinds of things, then I've been sharing some of that over on Instagram. So if you're on Instagram, then please follow me over there. More than a few times I've heard it said, and I think I've made this argument in the past as well, probably on this channel, that faith in one or more gods, or, you know, exploration or belief in any of the occult or spirituality or anything like that should be avoided because of its potential to cause harm. But I think that's overcautious, and I think the insistence that people with influence shouldn't encourage people to explore these kinds of things because there's a potential for harm that the influential person has imagined may well befall that person, I think that betrays a paternalism that I'm not that comfortable with. Before we go any further, I think it's important that I just kind of say the word harm, as we sort of see it on the internet at the moment, and it's thrown around a lot on the internet at the moment, that is not necessarily the most useful word. And that's mainly because it's very rarely defined, and it's used in this kind of vague way to sort of gesture towards something that is potentially harmful or is potentially capable of leading someone to feeling harmed in some way. And there's a lot of nuance there, a bit of a discussion to be had on that issue. That's beyond the scope of this video, but what I've decided I will do is talk about that in the audio companion on my Patreon for this video. So if you want to hear that, then Patreon link is in the description. It's going to be on the end card at the end of the video. Still, as I say, to insert yourself as this sort of overcautious naysayer in the exploration of potentially harmful things for people who are sort of seeking, you know, exploring the big questions of life and stuff, I think to play that part of an overcautious naysayer, or don't do that because it could lead you to X, Y, Z, that is all a little bit bit, that mayonnaise is too spicy, you know? It's all a little bit health and safety. And while I do think that telling cautionary tales is important, and, you know, for those of us who have gotten out of destructive cults, who feel that they can handle the consequences of speaking out, I think that's absolutely the right choice for those people who feel, you know, inclined towards doing that. But I do think rather than sort of trying to usher people away from potentially harmful beliefs and practices, whether they're harmful for like genuine personal reasons or the impact they might have on other people or some other reason, I think rather than trying to usher people away from doing those things, because if nothing else, that could sort of cause like a Streisand effect kind of a thing. I think better than that, we should be passing on our own knowledge and experience with those things as a preventative, and not a preventative of actually people exploring those things, as I say, but more a preventative of the potential for harm, so that people can know a little bit more going in and then do their sort of work to keep themselves safe while they're exploring these things, given that there may well be the potential for harm in whatever way we're defining that to befall them. And to that end, I think it's really important to be super specific about the kind of harm that we imagine may befall a person if they are getting into something spiritual. For example, the law of attraction is a great example of this. It has this tremendous potential to disempower, despite it being sort of ostensibly empowering. And there's a tendency for proponents of the law of attraction, especially in like the context of abuse, to encourage people to see what happened to them as though it was in some way their fault. And so if I'm trying to encourage somebody to, you know, think twice before starting to get into the law of attraction, I'm going to highlight that, rather than just saying something like, you know, I think the law of attraction is pretty harmful, or it's bad, or no one should believe it, or it's wrong, or whatever, you know. I don't think that helps very much. Still, you know, as harsh as it sounds, and obviously, you know, we want to avoid putting ourselves in harm's way, still, hardship tends to be an opportunity to learn and grow. I think if you're going around trying to prevent harm from being caused at the cost of exploration and the, you know, the freedom to make mistakes, you're kind of taking away a person's agency in that situation, you know? But at the same time, I would never want to abandon someone to something that I know has the potential to sort of leave them worse off. And there are, of course, those things that have, you know, much higher potential of fucking someone up, like cults, for example. Definitely avoid. And while I have learned and grown as a consequence of the experiences that I've had, I wouldn't wish them on anybody. So it's definitely a good idea not to just like completely drop the possibility of spirituality having a place in your life because you've been involved in a cult that was spiritually focused, or because you've had a bad experience with a form of spirituality. That's something that I've learned for myself throughout the last couple of years. Because there are some things that have a much lower risk of going badly, especially if you've got a good grasp on like critical thinking and you've got a decent level of like self-awareness and self-knowledge. Like you've put the work in to own your shit, and you're working through your shit in such a way that you're not going to transfer that into this thing that you're exploring and have that be part of why you end up getting hurt by this thing, you know. If you like own your shit and you've got that under wraps, certain things are much less likely to leave you worse off. And okay, so things like spirituality and magic and the occult, they do have the potential to make you literally go crazy if you're not careful. But kept in check, they can be very positive things. And when I see someone who's got that balance in their life and it's not making them like really fucking weird or really intolerable to be around or fucking their lives up, I'm like, you know, good for you, fantastic. Because I would love it if more of us had those kinds of things that enable us to function in what is ultimately a pretty difficult world to live in, not just because of our society, but because human life is hard. Why would I want people to have less that helps them deal with that, you know? But of course, that always comes with the caveat of like, make sure it's not making you worse off in some way. Make sure you're not paying a huge price for what ultimately then could become a crutch. But all the things I've come across that have a much lower potential for, you know, destroying your mental health, making your life fall to pieces in some way, all of the things that have a much lower potential for that, they maintain the locus of control within yourself. Like, it's all about you figuring this out for yourself. It's not that you're internalizing some sort of prescriptive mode of living. It's not that you're taking certain tenets and just taking them as read and living on them because they sound true to you in some way. There's a sort of an organic give and take in the exploration of these ideas where you figure them out for yourself. And the irony of saying this is that is what the New Age was supposed to be. That's what the New Age is supposed to be. This sort of make your own religion, like build a bear, but for faith, right? But it's not that anymore. It's become another weird way for people to feel certain about something, for people to sort of give themselves up to something that doesn't require a lot of investment from them in terms of their own emotional self or in terms of their own intellectual life, you know. It's become an opportunity to escape from freedom. It's become an opportunity to avoid yourself in service of some intellectual escapism, you know, some sort of lofty spiritual intellectualism. And it's rolled up with all this sanctimonious bullshit and sort of these grand ideas that no one fucking knows, but they're treated like they're true. And religion in many ways often goes in that direction. So I think it's much better to make sure that you do have that ownership of your own shit and that the locus of control does remain within yourself when you're navigating these ideas. You're not giving away your personal autonomy, your personal independence of mind, independence of life to anybody else. And if you're able to handle the potentially destructive parts of these kinds of things, then, you know, they can be tremendously enriching. Do you know, as I'm saying this, I never imagined that I would be sitting here basically making a case for faith and somewhat against an anti-theist position. I guess at this point I should be used to disagreeing with things that I used to believe and used to think. That's kind of become a bit of a trend in my life. Anyway, to break this down, the line I'm drawing here is kind of between encouraging people not to invest in some sort of idea or not even to explore a certain idea because A, we don't believe in it ourselves, or B, we've imagined or experienced that thing going badly in the past. That on the one side of this line, and on the other side of this line, which I think is a much better way of approaching this, is to encourage people to explore these kinds of things, but in such a way that, you know, they have critical thinking locked in. That is a skill that has been practiced up and is, you know, finely tuned, and also a degree of self-knowledge and self-awareness that enables you to realize when this is taking you over and also when this is enabling your bullshit, all the while respecting the person's autonomy and their ability to think for themselves in exploring this thing. While rationality is a really, really useful and super important tool for helping you to sort of navigate the uncertainties of life and figure things out so that you don't get lost in the endless mysteries of the metaphysical. And while it is an important part of preserving your own ability to remove yourself from a situation if you feel like you may be in harm's way, when rationality is applied honestly, rigorously, and without cynicism, I think there comes a point when you realize its limitations. And just like no belief system has all the answers and no one person is right about everything, no one tool is best suited to every single task. All in all, while rationality is important, and I have to keep stressing that because it really is, this is not me saying don't be rational. All in all, while rationality is super important, there are some places rationality can't take you, and sometimes the rational thing to do is be irrational. And sometimes it's in the setting aside of the explainable and the embracing of the mysteries of life that life becomes just a little bit more worth living. If we don't give ourselves the freedom to explore beyond the bounds of the known, beyond the bounds of our comfort zones, then how will we ever grow? So my strategy is safety first, then play. And when I say play, I don't mean like being a rigid pedant for sport or entertainment or a laugh and shitting on everybody else's beliefs. File that under lessons I've learned the hard way. I'm Andy Fellows, and this channel is all about living life with integrity and independence of mind in the face of cults, destructive spirituality, and toxic online culture. If you enjoyed this video today, please consider subscribing to the channel. And if you want to help support the channel and get a little bit of extra content from me every single week, consider supporting me over on Patreon. There's a link to that in the description and on the end card in just a second. Otherwise, please be kind and ask good questions, and I'll see you in the next one.